Welcome to this clergy couple webinar entitled Ministering to Couples Who Are Struggling with Pornography. When we first recorded the webinar last week, unfortunately, this brief introduction was cut off, so we're adding it to the webinar. I just would like to thank Leadership 100 for their continued support for the Center for Families Care Ministry and particularly for the ministry to clergy couples. And without further ado, we'll join the rest of the webinar. This is a very difficult topic that we are going to be discussing today, ministering to couples who are struggling with pornography. But it is a growing pastoral concern and something that I see regularly now in premarital preparation. In the inventory that I use for premarital preparation, there's a statement that each person responds to, and it indicates whether they are engaged in the use of pornography or not. And I would say for the first 15 years that I did premarital preparation, that statement was always answered in the negative. In the last 5 years, almost every inventory that I see indicates that either the male or the female is engaged in pornography to some degree or another. There's been a real uptick, and it's an important topic. It's one that both clergy and clergy wives need to be aware of. At first glance, it seems that this is a topic that's more just for the priests. However, as clergy wives, we are often the first point of contact for women who may be struggling with pornography themselves or whose husbands are struggling with pornography, and wives may be more comfortable coming to speak with us. So we need to be prepared to respond to these situations that we do encounter in this day and age. Today we have with us Dr. Rossi, who has years of expertise in ministering both to those who struggle with pornography and also helping to train and to equip seminarians as they prepare to enter into ministry to deal with this particular pastoral issue. Dr. Rossi is the clinical psychologist at St. Vladimir Seminary. He's also a member of the faculty there. He's been there for 20 years. Prior to his time at St. Vladimir's, he taught at Pace University for 24 years. His wife of blessed memory, Galina, died 29 years ago. They have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. And without further ado, welcome, Dr. Rossi. We are really happy to have you with us, your expertise, but more importantly, your love for Jesus Christ that radiates in everything you do and in all the work that you do at St. Vladimir's and in many other places. So welcome.
Thank you, Carrie. It really is a distinct and huge honor for me to be with you and the participants now, because we're dealing with a really, I would say, the hottest topic pastorally in our culture today. So it's a joy for me to be here.
So without further ado, we're just going to go straight to the questions. For those of you who have questions during this webinar, there's a box that says Q&A. Please type your questions in. You can either do them anonymously or indicate who you are, and we will do our best to get to all these questions in the hour that we have together. So, Dr. Rossi, let's just set the stage first of all. Could you please give us some basic statistics about the prevalence of pornography in the United States, both amongst men and women, and given these last 13 months of the challenges that we have all been facing, has there been some uptick?
Thank you, Carrie. Yes, and this will be quite truncated. I'll say right from the get-go that internet pornography is a drug because it changes brain chemistry. Those who use internet pornography can easily become love cripples. I can go into that more later. I also want to say that many, perhaps most, of our Orthodox children are getting their sex education through internet pornography. Now, it may not be through their home, but our children go to other children's homes and have access in libraries and so on. So it's there. So there's great need to protect our children as well as families. Statistics you ask about. Statistics are fluid, very difficult to pin down. 64% or 2/3 of men use pornography at least monthly. And at least 1/3 of men report using pornography daily and more. Women are not as prominent using it. Usually the statistics are 85% men, 15% women, but women can become frequent users, call them addicts if we will. And most of our children, by the time they reach whatever, 16, 18, have been exposed to internet pornography one way and another. So there's a whole bunch of issues that cascade from those statistics. 1/3 of young women admit to using pornography regularly. But I would also say at the get-go, there's a huge role for women, as well as men, of course, in dealing with this problem. We can deal with that as we go along.
And what would you say is the difference between more casual use of pornography and pornography addiction, so we understand those two terms?
Paralleling it to alcohol, casual use, I have a glass of wine at supper, or a recovering alcoholic, which I will admit at the get-go I am a recovering alcoholic with 29 years of sobriety. For internet pornography, because of its insidious depth, I don't make a distinction between casual use and addiction. That is to say, in my experience, any casual use becomes quickly enticing and ensnaring, and then becomes its own form of a force within the person. So, and that women become addicted in a different way than men. Men are quite visual by brain chemistry. Women, more often than not, enter the world of internet pornography by way of curiosity. I wonder what's there. And then into the world of chat room pornography. Oh, I wonder what this would be like. And then boom, 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 this is so fascinating and so gripping and so enthralling that I just really want it. I find this as a fine way to spend some of my time. So yeah, that's where I go with that. I don't make that.
Unlike alcohol, then, even casual use is harmful. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about how it's harmful to the person who's engaging in it, and then how it's harmful to the marriage relationship.
Thank you, Carrie. Really great questions. And I don't know that I can even begin to do justice to those questions. How does it harm the person? Well, again, a casual drink of alcohol, Jesus had casual drink of wine, no sin. Casual use of internet pornography is confessable sin. So that's for starters. Your question, what does it do to the person in the marriage? What it does to the person, basically, is changes brain chemistry, that is neural connections. We have 10 billion neurons in our cranium, and they connect by way of synapses. And so there are embedded little roads or paths in our head, we might call them habits. And they get changed quickly with internet pornography. Internet pornography and sexual arousal is the singularly most narrowing of focus in the brain, and it blocks out all distractions. Just to say, I won't get boring with this, but at the time of arousal, these chemicals are instantly and simultaneously engaged. Dopamine focuses attention. Norepinephrine, also called adrenaline, increases energy. Testosterone, which is the sexual drive. Oxytocin, which is the contractions in childbirth and milk production for women. And serotonin. All those simultaneously become engaged with the beginnings of arousal and, of course, with orgasm. Doing that even once can be fuse neural transmission and change the brain somehow. To do that frequently changes the brain more frequently. And again, the person who does that delusionally and without really being aware of it can easily become a love cripple that is incapable of seeing the other human being in front of me as a human being, but rather sees it as an object of my pleasure. Oh, you exist so that I can, in some way, have these neurons re-engaged, and in that sense, well, for me, I don't really care about you so much as I care about my own jollies, my own pleasure from your presence, and to be blunt, from your body. I don't care about your psyche, I don't care about your desires, I don't care who you are, but I do care about how you're built. So it changes the person radically. There's much more to say about that, about how it changes the person. And when we come to recommendations, I'll recommend a really good book. For now, the other question was, how does it change the marriage?
Well, let me
Well,
ask you, let me interject another question here then. From a spiritual perspective, of that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, how does this dishonor the temple of the Holy Spirit that lives within us?
the best I can say is it radically subverts and upends the use of the body. So, but what really gets upended is the frontal lobe, my thinking, my judgment, my assessment about how my body is. So I can be using it in pornography and still, I know people who are going to confession and receiving the Eucharist and using it in pornography and mentally putting it together. I know one man whose reputation you would know, who told me he uses internet pornography and it's God's way of keeping him humble. That's a delusion. He's implying that God is giving that to him as helping him with virtue. So it perverts our thinking about our body mostly. Let me just say a word about delusion. We humans are very easily deluded. So I can think I can be loving my wife, and what's wrong with her that she doesn't appreciate me while I'm using this pornography, but just on delusion. When I was a high school guidance counselor, I had a boss who was a heavy set man with a red face and a bulbous nose, once called me in his office. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to get reamed out for something. I was scared. Closed the door and he said, Al, I went to the doctor today and I got bad news. And I said to myself, it's not about me. He said, my doctor told me that my dad died of a heart attack, that all in the family have high blood pressure, as do I, that my history of my life so far has all pointed to the fact that alcohol for me is a serious problem. And he told me that I had to stop drinking. I sat there. He looked at me. I'll make up a name. John, so what are you going to do? And he looked at me delusionally as if I were crazy. He said, obviously, I'm going to change doctors. His solution to his problem, delusionally, was to change doctors. Now, I'm using that as a parallel to say that the use of pornography changes our thinking about our body. So I can still think of my body as a temple of the Holy Spirit and able to understand. In fact, I can't. And then I delusionally think the problem is theirs, that they don't appreciate my efforts and my overtures.
Now let's move on to how is pornography harmful to the marriage relationship, other than that the person engaging in the pornography ends up seeing the spouse more as an object of pleasure rather than a person. how does that infiltrate and sort of pervade the whole marriage relationship outside of the sexual aspect of the relationship?
Great question, Carrie. And all I can say is marriage is a gift from God to help two people partner and learn to love not only each other, but the big bad world in a different kind of way. Internet pornography changes that perspective of marriage and then does not any longer allow the married person using the pornography to be able to love bigger, better, more virtuously, but thinks that he or she is. I think I'm still okay. We're doing good things together. We go to church together and we have two cars. But in point of fact, the reality, looking in another person's eyes with attention and with respect and with genuine love begins to diminish. It's almost like having cataracts over one's eyes. Now I say that because I just had cataract surgery last week successfully. But it changes the marriage, and then the marriage be, begins to disintegrate. It begins to be less bonding, less fusing, less important to the two people. And as often as is not, the marriage just dissolves simply because there's nothing there. That there's no reality from the one person, it takes two people, from the one person's point of view, it's becoming less and less and less about growing together and therefore expanding to the universe, but it's becoming constricting. It's all about me and my narcissistic ways. And therefore, at some point, even without any obvious reason, the person just shrugs their shoulders and it's over. It 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 it, it, it the marriage evaporates. I say it like that.
So what I'm sort of hearing here too is it blocks the use of pornography, blocks the grace of God that grows our love toward oneness in marriage, and then can eventually destroy the marriage as a result, because when somebody is engaged in pornography, it's very difficult for that love of Christ to keep growing in the person so that that love is reflected in the marriage relationship.
Kira, you nailed it. You
Okay.
nailed it. That's exactly the point.
Okay.
And that's why marriage counseling often doesn't work for these people, because there's something, a virus like COVID, spiritually, psychologically, that's eating at the marriage that transcends, oversees counseling of any sort, that the counseling is far too superficial to get at the real problem.
Okay. We're going to get into that treatment piece a little bit later, but thank you. That's important uh, hors d'oeuvre to what's to come. So, what would you say a in confession or in a confidential conversation, a person comes to a priest or a clergy wife, um, either admitting to using pornography or out of concern for the spouse using pornography? What is the best way to approach the person and to respond to the person in the situation? And I think, many of clergy wives are certainly not equipped for this unless some of us have special training for this and counseling. And many of our clergy really are ill equipped to even engage in these conversations. And we've got some questions coming in already about this. So please begin that part of the conversation. I'll be interjecting some other questions.
Yes, as now your question is an octopus. It's in many facets to it. Bottom line, I or any of you, when approached by a person about his or her or partners or friends problem with internet pornography, can only help that person out of love. Love is the only transformative force we have. So when someone says to me, as often happens as the psychologist at St. Vladimir's, Dr. Rossi, I have this problem with internet pornography. My first job is relational. I need to establish more of a relationship with that person so that I can actually, so the person trusts me, and so the person knows what I'm saying really comes out of care, not out of a stranger's comment. So that's the first thing. Once that's said, then every situation's different. So I think that, and one who is approached that way needs to be ready for successes and failures, so to speak. One time in counseling at St. Vladimir's, a student came to me about anger. We dealt with his anger issue, ba 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 ba. And then I said to him, "Might I ask you a personal question?" Sure. In the last 3 months, have you looked at any internet pornography? He who was engaged and properly talking put his head down between his knees and began to cry so much that there were teardrops on my rug. He looked up and he said, I have. I said, well, are you interested to stop? He said, yes, but I'm a converted evangelical, and I've had a number of pastors tell me that they would help me, and they never did. So I'm hopeless about ever getting over this. I said, well, I have helped through the years, and I will claim that I could help you if you'd let me.
So pastoral care begins with the love of Jesus Christ toward being given to the person, then develops in building a relationship with that person, a relationship of love. And then what in terms of the pastoral care? And now I'd like to sort of move toward, okay, what does pastoral care look like that a priest or a loving clergy wife might give? And then where's that line that goes to counseling or therapy or professional help? And how do we know what that line is, both as clergy and as clergy wives, and what we can offer by the love of God and the grace of God, and then what needs to be left to a professional? So what does pastoral care actually look like in such a situation? And will it look similar in the context of confession versus I'm making an appointment to go see my priest and to talk about this because I realize I have a problem?
Yes, really. I mean, this is the heart of the matter, Carrie. And I'll begin a bit. But back to what I was saying before, that person I was counseling, and I said, I could offer help and I can guarantee some success because I've had success and so on. He looked me right in the eye and he said, no, I've been told that before and I don't trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And he never did anything again. He had another year and a half to go at the seminary. He could never look me in the eye. I would say hello to him, but I could tell he was getting sadder and sadder and sadder by my observation. So for those of us trying to help others, we need to be aware that there'll be successes and failures. We'll have a relationship, we'll talk very candidly, and people are going to say, don't want it. And that's the way it is. Back to what you said. I'll start with where you started, priests. This is my little opinion. Al Rossi, I'm not a priest and I don't tell priests what to do. And I'm not Greek, OCA. That said, my little opinion is if I were a priest in today's culture for males over the age of 18 or 21, anything arbitrary, hearing confessions, I would hear the person's confession, and for virtually all males, there might be exceptions, but virtually all, I would ask the question, in the past 3 months, have you looked at any pornography? Because many are in denial. They'll go to confession, talk about anger and talk about missing prayers and la 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 lulu, and not talk about this for embarrassment or denial or whatever. So I would frontally ask it in confession of men. I would never ask it of women. That's far too dicey and provocative. If she brings it up, that's a separate story. But so that's the initial getting the nose of the camel into the tent kind of thing. That said, for a person who admits, I do have a problem, well, you admit you have a problem. Would you like to do something about it? Yes, it's a monkey on my back and I can't do anything about it. And we'll save this for later. Exactly what is it a person would lead the person toward doing this? Now I'll put a parenthesis, a sidebar here. One of the things I do, I have a phone meeting weekly for Orthodox priests married with children and sexually cooperative wives who have problems with internet pornography. Now that's been going on for 7 years and more weekly. And the Orthodox priests are gaining traction over internet pornography use and the impact on their marriages and on their own personal lives. So one of the things that's needed for any traction and to lead a person out of this passion is transparency and accountability inside of and outside of confession. Inside of and outside of confession. Now that sentence has a whole hand grenade in it as well, because what I'm saying, and I have the approval of Father Thomas Hopko and Archimandrite Meletios Weber, who wrote his book on Steps of Transformation, I'm saying that unless outside of confession is included, only using inside confession as the singular sole remedy. Okay, thank you for confessing this. And keep trying not to do it and say Jesus prayer 100 million times a day. I keep coming back, fall down and get up. That's insufficient. More than insufficient, it's counterproductive. It aids and abets the problem. We wouldn't treat a cocaine addict that way. We wouldn't say to a cocaine addict, okay, fall down and get up and keep coming back. No, it takes more than mere revolving door confession. That's all a separate topic. But that's with priests. So yeah, in my own little way, I come out strong about what the role of priest initially is for this. Now I'll just touch on the role of counseling. In my experience in today's world, counseling is not at all sufficient to overcome internet pornography use. I'm not saying addiction, I'm just saying use for various reasons. The opinion of the therapist and so on. Now there's a very particular road that I recommend that does work. And the thin line that you refer to, when does a person need therapy? I think a person needs therapy for psychological reasons. Whole host of them: depression, anxiety, OCD, ADD, ADHD, and so on. All of those need counseling. Does use of internet pornography constitute a necessary referral for counseling? No. That's taken care of another way that we'll get into, but not with one-on-one or group counseling per se.
Okay, let's leave that there for now, because there's another related question that came in from a priest, and I'm just going to read it to you. In confession lately, dealing with men who have confessed regularly to porn use and masturbation, I lately have asked them to try separating the two rather than taking them on at the same time, focusing on not using the porn and dealing with the self-abuse later. What are your thoughts on this approach?
I think the priest has a lovely initial impulse, and I agree with the impulse, but I disagree with the conclusion. I think that looking at pornography and masturbation are far too closely related to separate. That is to say, it's too easy for a person to say, oh, I'm looking at this stuff and I'm not masturbating and therefore I'm halfway or doing some good. No. Jesus said, Any man who looks at a woman lustfully commits adultery with her in his heart. And of course, we would say any woman who looks at a man lustfully, or a woman looks at a woman, or a man looks at a man. Adultery in his time was punishable by death. Jesus is calling watching internet pornography adultery. So, in and of itself, it's closely linked to masturbation. So, I think they need to be, because I do have persons I counsel who say to me, "Oh, I looked at internet pornography 5 times last week, but I didn't masturbate and I'm doing really good." No, no, what's got to stop is what Jesus said, looking at another lustfully. One of the one of the Beatitudes is, how's it go? Um, we're asked to clothe the naked. That's what Jesus wants us to do. If a person is naked or semi-naked, get clothes. The person using internet pornography does exactly the opposite. Takes a clothed person and makes the person naked. So it's exactly the opposite of what Jesus wants for his friends, for his Christians, for his people who are following his way. So I would disagree with the priest.
Okay.
But again, it's a little opinion that he could be right. So
And then someone else made a very important point too, that the internet isn't the only way that pornography that we are exposed to pornography. I mean, you turn on a series on Netflix and you're looking at soft porn and you don't even realize it until you see it. And we see it everywhere in our culture. So you're specifying internet pornography. Would you generalize it and broaden it to all of the sexual images that just bombard us every day that, you know, that I find myself becoming somewhat insensitive to? If I've been told this is a really good series, I just sort of avoid sometimes I'll fast forward, but I'll keep watching sometimes. And then other times, if it hits me right in the face, I'm like, I'm not going anywhere near this. But could you address that just a little bit too? And again, this is even more pervasive, than the percentages of those who actually engage in internet pornography.
yes, I'll provide a quote, please, from Father John Breck, his book, The Sacred Gift of Life. He says, "We live in a sex-saturated culture. Our threshold of tolerance towards sexual explicitness and exploitation has been dramatically lowered, and the spiritual and psychological toll exacted by this situation is incalculable." So here where I live, if I go up Central Avenue in Scarsdale, in the back of a bus is an ad for Victoria's Secret. It was called pornography when I was a kid. Today it's called advertising. There's no way around it. So yes, Carrie, this is far beyond and past um, any of the uh, limits of internet pornography. We live in a crazy world. It is sex saturated. So yes, it really depends on one's eyes and what one wants to do with one's eyes. So it's possible to never use internet pornography, but still be very immersed in sexual exploitation in my own mind. I've had men say they could have sexual imaginations by looking at a blank wall because it's inside, or going to a beach in the summertime, even an Orthodox youth, beach or something camp. So yes, the problem is much greater than internet pornography. But internet pornography is a very easy way to see its ravages because it goes farther. In general, you can't get in the culture what you can get on the internet.
Okay. Now, what specific advice might you have for clergy wives who are sometimes approached about this and even other difficult matters by women in the parish who are more comfortable speaking with a woman and seeing the clergy wife as being a confidant and somebody safe that they can speak with?
For those on the right now, those who will watch it in archives, and for men who then can talk to women, for clergy wives and women in the parish generally, the first thing I would say is see yourself as a resource person and therefore begin to do more research on the issue and have a certain knowledge that you have. How does one do that? Well, I have three recommendations. One, on Ancient Faith Radio, I have a podcast called Becoming a Healing Presence. In my archives, I have two, part one, part two of internet pornography. That's pretty good. So that's where I always ask. So going back to one of your previous questions, if someone says to me, I have a problem, what should I do? One of the first things I say is do me a favor, watch the two parts of my podcast on NH Faith Fair, then we'll talk more because that provides more enlightenment for the person with a problem. And now back to the women that we're talking to see themselves more as resource persons for other needy persons. So that's the first, Ancient Faith Radio. The second is a book that you might want to write in chat or something. It's called The Drug of the New Millennium. Notice it's a drug, it's about internet pornography. It's about the brain science behind internet pornography by Castleman, Kastleman, Mark Kastleman, Mark Castleman.
Okay.
And the third resource is the OCA.org website. Scrolling down, there's a whole icon for sexual abuse issues. Then there's a great deal there on internet pornography that I've written and other people have written. So I'm suggesting that the women begin to change their self-identity a little bit instead of being just a person who's, you know, not real adept at this. It's not earth science because the basic thing is to have someone who you're accountable and transparent with. So one of the things the women can do is to, for lack of a better word, educate young women, college age, and young adults about the issue because you know what? They are basically blind and ill-informed, and I would even say ignorant of the ravages of internet pornography for lots of reasons. For example, I talk to young adults all the time. 4 times this summer, I'll talk to high school students at Hellenic College Crossroad, and I talk about this stuff. In October, I've been invited to give a keynote at the Young Adult Conference, 300 young adults, and I'll talk about this stuff. More often than not, our Orthodox females in college hear something like this. They're in college, freshman, sophomore, junior, interested in having friends, boyfriends, and girlfriends. A boy says to her, you know, how about if we hang out a bit, maybe Friday after classes, come over to my room and, you know, we'll play some cards and watch a video. Maybe we could play a few video games, watch a little internet pornography. We'll go out to dinner and then go dancing. And she says, yes, that's the agenda presented. She doesn't see the snake in the grass. She doesn't see internet pornography as part of that. And her conclusion is often, oh, boys will be boys. They watch video games and watch internet pornography, without realizing that she's the great loser when he watches it because he's becoming a love cripple and unable to love her as she deserves and would want to be loved. So we need women, young women, to stand up more to their male friends by saying, I don't want to watch that, and I'm going to ask that you don't do that. They need to see revulsion in the women for internet pornography, which in some part they're not seeing. So that's important for not only priest wives, but any woman of conscience in our culture to be able to educate others and be available. And the other thing is, I think a woman, priest wife, or others can let it be known that she's doing some research on this topic, that she's concerned, that she would be a person who'd be interested in talking with others. And she can say that to her priest, her husband, her women friends, to virtually anybody. Now, there's more to say on that topic as well, but I want to get back to that priest's question about, he said he has a number of men who are admitting in confession in pornography. One priest I know locally, 100 miles away, has that problem. And he asked each of them if they'd be willing to get together with other men with the same problem and talk. Each of them said yes, and they had a meeting. They invited me to their first meeting, and they were wide open and are continuing to support each other. It's a whole separate topic. But as I have this group for men, priests, Orthodox priests who have a problem with internet pornography. So I have a whole bunch of other groups that I facilitate, including a group of bishops, because the power of small groups is enormous. So to the extent that we can get these people together, I have a group at St. Vladimir's students who said to me they have a problem. We get together once a week and talk on Zoom. So these meetings can be on Zoom, etc. So yeah.
So what I'm clearly hearing from everything you're saying here is, going back to what you said at the beginning, transparency and accountability are the two primary ways of moving toward healing from pornography. And we have opportunities in the life of the church to create accountability, transparency groups within people who are struggling with these things in order to support that. That's sort of the umbrella of the pastoral care, is providing a safe space for the accountability and the transparency.
That's right. That's spot on. I have the group at St. Vladimir's that I meet with. One of them has 3 friends who have this problem. He has started his own group, nothing to do with me. And they get together. They live near each other, so they're live. Mine are Zoom. And they meet bi-weekly and have invited me twice to be with them and talk a little bit on Zoom, and I do. So yes, accountability and transparency inside and outside of confession, and if possible in small groups, is optimal. Optimal. Now back to a point that is, I'll make a pastoral point. St. Maximus the Confessor says that there's a very strong link between anger and lust. Deep down, anger and lust are kissing cousins, so to speak. That's a very important insight pastorally, because in today's world, if one encounters a person who has anger issues, it is as likely as not there are lust issues as well in internet pornography. Now, I use that, of course, in my counseling. So when a student wrote to me this week, can I meet you? I want to talk about my anger issues. Sure, we'll talk about anger management, blah, blah, blah. Then I'll ask, I'd like to ask you if you've watched internet pornography at all in the past few months. And almost always the anger issue links with a lust issue, and that's where the problem is. So the person could go to anger management classes forever and not change the anger expression because it's being fueled by lust. So when one sees someone who's angry, man or woman, one in one's mind says, I just wonder if there's an internet pornography or lust problem of some sort here. And I wonder how I might deal with it, help the person. Yeah.
So if a couple were to come to a priest to discuss that one or both has an issue with pornography, they're seeing that it's impacting the marriage relationship, how would you respond as a clergyman about transparency and accountability to the spouse who is not engaging in pornography? Or if they both are, what kind of pastoral care would you provide for them to build in transparency and accountability to support one another as they seek to be healed from this? I'm assuming that's not all that they'll be doing to be healed, but I think it's a very important part of the process that you be accountable to, because I know when, I have counseled couples who are dealing with adultery, there's a lot of accountability to the person who is not engaged in the adultery on the part of the one who is. And so I'm assuming it's very similar with pornography.
Yes. Statistically, the cases that I'm familiar with and that I read about are almost always asynchronous. It's almost always one of the two, and almost always is the man who's into internet pornography, and she is aware of it. And then the question is, what is it she does with him? Now, that varies greatly. And we need to be prepared no matter what happens, no matter what she does, that man might seek and get internet pornography until the marriage gets destroyed. I'll give you an example. I had a call a few years ago from a priest, Orthodox, who was crying on the phone. He said that Saturday night until 2 o'clock in the morning, when his wife was asleep and they had children, he was watching internet pornography. Then he did the divine liturgy the next day, and he felt like suicide. He just felt so rotten. This was Monday when he called me, that he couldn't stand himself because he was doing internet pornography and within 12 hours the divine liturgy and receiving communion. So I very softly tried to set up a relationship with him. I'll call his name John. John, I'm really glad you could tell me this, and it took great courage to be able to say it. Maybe we can continue to talk a bit more about this, and there are some things you can do to get this monkey off your back. Would you like to do that? He said yes, and never called me again. I reached out to him, and he never responded, because I had said to him, I can help you, and we can get this off your back. And he, in effect, said to me, for whatever reason, I'm choosing to stay with it. They are now divorced. Okay. The question I keep asking myself is, the woman never knew all along. She thinks he's narcissistic, and they have to divorce. I cannot say to her what he told me in private, of course. But I wonder, had she done something early on and found out that he had an internet pornography problem and put the marriage on the line, as some wives have, either you're going to do this or it's over. This would have been 7 years ago. My own opinion is that marriage could have been saved. So at some point, it can involve some very strong measures from the wife because the marriage is at stake. Now, what could that wife have done then? Had she asked him, are you looking at pornography? He'd have denied it, probably. No. And I'm not advocating this because it has some ethical problems, but I do know a couple of women who have actually gone onto their husband's computer when their husband wasn't there and looked at the history of the use of the computer and discovered and then confronted the husband with it as the only way. She talked to him first. It didn't work. That's always the first in conversation. That doesn't work. And he's getting more angry and more narcissistic. Then what are her choices? So I'm saying that some women have done that successfully. Now, if there's any person, and that can also be done with older children if one wants to check their computer history. If the question is asked, how do I do a history of my computer? It's pretty easy. I tried it last night. I can't go into it now, but there's a difference between if I have a PC or a Mac, and all I can say is go on the search engine, look for how do I find the history of my computer, and there are a list of things to do in a couple of videos. So I just want to say that as an aside. But that marriage, I happen to know that couple, both the priest and his wife, divorced, very well. And I feel so bad that I think the marriage could have been saved had she done something very, how do I say, I don't even know a good word, just she did something very serious. Say it like that.
Because it's a desperate situation, and sometimes we do have to do desperate things in desperate situations, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have to
Now,
understand
another related, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go
so
ahead.
just we have to understand the gravity of the situation. If we don't, it might be that the whole thing is combustible and may just blow up.
Another question that came in working with individuals with pornography addiction, there's a lot of shame. What do you do to work with the shame that surrounds this addiction? Do you help the person separate what they're participating in and who they are as a person? Did you hear all that? Because you froze for a moment.
Yeah, not the ending.
Okay.
The last.
Do you help the person separate what they're participating in and who they are as a person, in helping them deal with the shame surrounding pornography addiction?
A really good question. I'll back up and say, from my point of view, well, internet pornography has what's called the four A's, first letter of the alphabet. A, it's accessible. It's right there. You don't have to go looking for it. It's looking for you. And often any word that's misspelled, the perpetrators have put something in it. It's A, accessible. A, it's affordable, effectively free in the beginning. It's anonymous, called the stealth drug, and it's aggressive. It's looking for us. Pornographers are predators. And internet pornography is a multi-billion-dollar industry, $100 billion net per year. More money is made from internet pornography than is made on National Football League, the NBA, National Basketball Association, and Major League Baseball profits combined. So there's big business and a lot being made over it. That said, I forget, what was your question again, Carrie?
It was about the shame
Oh,
surrounding
yes.
um, people who have this addiction, and do you separate the person from what the person is doing
Yes.
as part of the ministering to them?
Yes. A couple of basic questions. From my perspective, what defines a person using pornography, internet pornography? What makes that person an addict? Anyone who uses internet pornography more than once every 3 months, by my standards, is an addict. That's mine, and it's arbitrary. Um, what does one do for an addict? Two things. One, there's a evangelical software called Covenant Eyes. That's one word, covenanteyes.com, that can be joined. I was on it. Frankly, I've never watched internet pornography, by God's grace. Okay. But just to see what it was like, I was on it. Remember, Father Hopko was my person that got my report. And so when one signs up with one or two or three other persons who get a weekly report on every URL website that I visited. And it's categorized. So if there's anything hot, it's mentioned. After a while, Father Hopko said to me, Al, you're boring. I said, thank you. But Covenant Eyes is something that initially can help. It's not at all panacea, but it's okay. It costs a little bit, but it's certainly worth it. It costs a lot more than, lot less than internet pornography would cost in due time. The other thing is a group called SA, Sexaholics Anonymous. Now that's a whole separate topic. There are many groups that claim to be sex recovery groups. So there's SA, I'm recommending. There's also SRA, SAA, SLA, on and on. SA is the only group that aligns with orthodoxy. No sex with outside of a monogamous heterosexual marriage, period. All the other groups allow the person to define one's own bottom line. So most of it is about same sex. So if I have a same sex partner and we agree we're going to live a lifetime together, that's okay in SRA or SLA or SAA. So I'm simply recommending SA, and it can be contacted with whatever it is, I think sa.org. Now, I have seminarians, male, who are, for the last number of years, um, going to SA programs that is live or Zoom or phone these days. And all I can say is, boom, boom, it works. So that's where that goes. Now, that line between counseling and shame was your question. Um, I would say to the person using pornography, stop that act. And this is the way you do it: covenantized essay, accountability, small group, transparency. Now, if you have excess shame that goes along with it, that psychologically might require counseling, because it probably ties in with childhood issues and other things. And but at the counseling session, you would be talking about my shame not getting me off internet pornography. You understand the distinction I'm making?
Yes,
And
yes,
does
yes.
it have a purpose to get rid of sexual, lustful activity?
Okay. We are very close to our ending mark. I think you talked about the resources that you would recommend. If there are any others, you can email them to me, and I then can send out an email to everybody who's participated today. There are a few more questions. One was addressed to me at the very beginning. Pres Carey, do you think couples in premarital preparation are actually engaged with pornography more, or are they more willing to admit it? Father, I think they're just more willing to admit it because it's become more, quote, acceptable in our culture, so they don't see it as any kind of a real issue. So why not say that I'm engaging in it? That's my conclusion to that. And then I think we better bring this to a close. We do have a few more questions, but they're questions that are going to require some very long answers. And some explanation. So I think let's bring closure right now. Dr. Rossi, if you are willing to perhaps do a part 2 that might be a little bit more focused, perhaps we could do that in a few months. We would really, we will be sending out an email to the participants with some of this information. If you have any feedback, my email address is kpappas@goarch.org. If you have suggestions for any future webinars, presenters, please let me know. Dr. Rossi, thank you. You took a really difficult topic and we spoke very frankly about it, but this, I really benefited from this tremendously, and I really hope that all of the clergy and the clergy wives involved in this have also benefited from it. Thank you. God bless and continue to bless your work and grant you many years. And any final word from you now?
Yes. Would you like to give them my email address?
Yes. Dr. Rossi's email address, and he did let me know that he will be available if anybody would like to be in contact with him. It is real simple now at what? Well, actually,
Gmail.
I'm going to type it in.
realsimplenow@gmail.com.
Email. Okay, I'm typing it in right now and sending it to everybody. So with that, let's come to a close, and may the Lord bless us as we leave this gathering, and grant his peace and his healing upon all of us. Lord, for you are holy, and through the prayers of your holy apostles, bless us, have mercy on us, and save us. Amen.
Thank you, Carrie, for having the courage to do this, to spearhead and get this topic above the surface and deal with it properly. Did a great job.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.